Hi everyone, it's Sharon Anthos from Blackboard, and I wanted to officially welcome everyone to week 3 of Designing an Exemplary Course MOOC. Today we're going to be just reviewing a couple of reminders, and then we're going to be discussing the assessment portion of the Exemplary Course rubric. And as a lineup of speakers, we have Dr. Susan Savicek from Fort Hays State University. We have Tess Bader from Colorado State University, the Global Campus. And we have Dr. Taria Bond from California Baptist University. And both Tess and Taria are Exemplary Course winners from this year, and Susan is our Exemplary Course Director. And I also wanted to note that Taria is also helped us design the course for this MOOC. So a couple of reminders here. I'll go into full details. We've got, one of the goals from this class was to create a learning community where you can all learn from each other. And taking a cue from one of our colleagues, Chuck Severance, who just finished teaching a MOOC on Internet history, well, we've decided to create a Hall of Fame just like he did. This is going to be a chance where you can publicly thank your fellow students who were particularly helpful and added to your enjoyment in the class and added to how much you've learned. So if there is someone that you feel that deserves a Hall of Fame nomination, you just nominate them and a short description in the course, and you can find this in the Q&A forum, which is in the discussion section of the course. And furthermore, we can comment and vote on the nominations, and they'll end up in the Hall of Fame. And once it's done, we can lock the forum and pin it to the top so it'll stay there forever without modification if people come back and look at the archived course materials. We announced this last week, and we've noticed a couple of people have already put their nominations in. So thank you so much for that. And then I wanted to highlight a tweet chat. So our very own Dr. Taria Bond from California Baptist University is tomorrow going to be participating in a tweet chat from 1 to 1:30. Dr. Bond is a leader in instructional design for California Baptist and is a presenter in today's session. And she'll share her extensive understanding of course management systems and learning theories and instructional design principles, especially around how they affect today's active learner. So it's really fun to participate in a tweet chat. If you've never done that before, you can just go onto Twitter and you can search the hashtag MOOCchat before the chat, and it'll go on between 1 and 1:30 tomorrow Eastern Time. So with that, I would like to pass it over to Susan to introduce today's session.
Hello everyone, I'm Susan Zavacek, and I just want to go very quickly through the agenda. We'll introduce our presenters today. I will spend just a few minutes kind of giving an overview of assessment and some of the key issues we need to be thinking about when we design assessments. Tess Bader will be talking about feedback using waypoint outcomes, and Dr. Taria Bond is going to talk about assessment design. Following that, we'll have some time for question and answer. This is my slide. I'm not going to read it to you. I will just say that my focus really is on instructional design and learning theory. I'm especially interested in higher order thinking skills and assessment, which is why I'm doing this particular component of the MOOC. Tess Bader will also be joining us from CSU, the Global Campus, and Tess is one of our award-winning course designers, as is Dr. Taria Bond, who is from California Baptist University. Each of them will have an opportunity to introduce themselves as we move through the presentation. So I won't take a lot of time doing these introductions, but we'll jump right into the good stuff. If we break down instructional design, almost any instructional design model, into sort of 3 core areas, what we find is that we can bring that into about 3 main questions. What should students be able to do as a result of this instruction? In other words, the outcomes, the objectives. That next part, the instructional strategy section, what should students be doing to learn these new skills? And then finally, the part that we're going to focus on today, the assessment. How will you know if they've succeeded? And we could broaden that slightly and say, how will you know if they're making progress, or maybe just as importantly, not making progress? I want to talk briefly about why we assess. Very often I'll speak to groups and I'll say, well, why do we give tests? Why do we do assessment? And unfortunately, the first answer that I frequently hear from people is, well, we have to assign grades. Honestly, I think that's about the least important reason. I feel like the reasons I've provided here, are the purposes for assessment that I've provided here, I've put them in what I would sort of consider priority order, with the first two being really the two most important reasons that we would engage in assessment. That is, to reinforce important concepts and skills, because obviously you're not going to do assessment on things that aren't important. And secondly, providing feedback to you and to the learners. Both of those areas, the reinforcement of important skills, including providing practice with new skills, and getting that feedback, are probably the two most important purposes for including high-quality assessment in your course. Another very important reason is to diagnose misconceptions. If you've read any of the literature on how strong misconceptions can be and how dangerous they can be for advanced learning, you'll realize that catching those problems, those errors in thinking, just general misconceptions our students may have, catching those early on before they interfere with later learning is very, very important. So that's another really important purpose for doing assessment. Certainly motivating learners to keep up is important. There's nothing like, a quiz or an activity or some reason that students will be held accountable. There's nothing like one of those activities to keep them on track. And then finally, as I said, we do need to do assessment for administrative purposes, but honestly, I would consider that the least important purpose for assessment. So how do we figure out if our assessments are effective? Well, obviously, they should be aligned with the outcomes. If we say that we want our students to be able to do a certain kind of task, then we should assess that. Now, one area that we run into problems occasionally is that people will write these beautiful, higher order thinking outcomes, but then they won't assess at that level. So it's very important that our assessments actually match up with the outcomes that we've written, those objectives that we've identified at the beginning. Assessments need to be explained clearly, written understandably. Many of us came into distance education from teaching in the traditional face-to-face classroom, where it was very easy for a student to catch us after class, see us in the hall, raise their hand during class and say, now, when you said a paper, did you mean double-spaced? Did you mean whatever? We don't have that luxury in the online environment, so it's very important that our assessment activities are explained very, very clearly to students and include enough detail. Certainly measuring what we think they're measuring, also known as validity, is very important. Probably the classic example here is that math teachers may give tests that include story problems. Unfortunately, in some cases, what the story problems end up measuring is the student's reading ability more than their mathematical ability. And so we need to make sure that, in fact, the assessments we include are measuring what we think they're measuring. Assessments should include feedback, because again, that's one of those key purposes for assessment. Assessments need to let us know where we're at, need to give us that sense of benchmarking. I don't know about you, but I remember taking some classes certainly in my undergraduate career, where I'd be a few weeks into the course and not really have a feel for if I was getting it or not, because I wasn't getting enough feedback. And so it's very, very important that we provide feedback with our assessments. The reliability of the assessments is very important. Those results need to be reproducible, and in fact need to be consistent across raters as well. Finally, one element of an effective assessment that sometimes we don't really think about is what's called a good discriminator. A good discriminator is an activity that the students who really know the content will do well on it, and the students who don't know the content will not do well on it. If you have an assessment activity that your best students are really bombing, you may have a poor discriminator. So you need to kind of keep an eye on that and identify if in fact your assessments are good discriminators of who in fact is getting it. I'm going to jump up on a soapbox for just a moment here. I think it's very, very important that we avoid curve grading in courses. Curve grading refers to assigning grades by comparing one student's performance to another student's performance. In other words, we line everybody up according to their scores and say this person did the best and this person did the worst, and assign grades that way. The problem with that is that your grade then depends not on how much you actually learned, but who else was in the course with you. So as a student, if I was taking a course that was graded on a curve, in fact, what I would want to do is be in a course with a lot of dumb other students. That's not a very nice way to say it, but if I'm going to be compared to others, not to a standard, then it's not really going to be an accurate reflection of what I have learned. For that reason, it's very important that we assign grades by comparing student performance to the objectives, those standards. And certainly keeping in mind that grades are a proxy. They're a very limited symbol that represents what students can do. And again, I think, grades are something we need to do, but they are limited in terms of what they tell us. Okay, just a few issues around implementing assessments. Ongoing activities can be very important as far as, again, providing benchmarking, allowing students to practice new skills, try out new ideas. Tori is going to be talking about some embedded assessment and some ongoing activities in her in her part of this webinar. So I hope you'll really pay attention to that, because those kinds of embedded activities are a way for students to really determine for themselves if in fact they are getting it. And again, as a wonderful way to identify misconceptions early on in a course. Non-graded activities should be considered, and by that what I mean is that not every assessment activity needs to have a score attached to it. I sometimes have activities in my course that are required, but there are no points assigned. The students just have to do them. But I'm not going to fold those into the grade. Very often one of the concerns with having a lot of assessment activities is the teacher's time. All of a sudden it sounds like, oh my gosh, I've got to read a zillion papers, or I have to look at all these assignments. Keep in mind that as the instructor, you don't necessarily have to read every single assessment. You can have peer activities, you can have self-assessment activities. So think about assessments beyond that everything needs to receive points or a score. The many assessment activities can simply be built in as a way for students to practice skills and get feedback. Using rubrics is extremely important, and I believe Tess is going to talk about this in some detail a little later, so I won't really belabor this except to say that it's very, very important to provide those rubrics up front to your students. One of our previous ECP winners, Rosemary Dixon, had a very interesting project where she actually provided students the rubric for a paper they would be writing later in the semester, and then she gave them a couple of papers from prior semesters with the identifying information taken off, of course, and the students used the rubric they would be graded with, and they graded a previous paper. And it was a wonderful way for the students to really get a sense of what Rosemary's expectations were. Flexibility and structure. What I'm looking at here is how much flexibility are you willing to provide to students in terms of ongoing activities, due dates. Are you willing to, maybe for your students who are a little more what I would call intellectually mature, are you willing to say to them, how would you like to demonstrate that you have mastered this content? And have the students come up with their own ideas for assessment activities. How can you demonstrate mastery? And allow the students some flexibility in that. Academic misconduct, that could be a whole series of webinars all on its own. I would say that there are things that we can do in assessment to alleviate this problem, such as randomizing test questions, if you're using online tests, using a lockdown browser. I like to have students submit to me draft forms of papers rather than just the final one. These are all activities that you can try out to alleviate the problem of academic misconduct as far as plagiarism or cheating of other forms. I will say, however, that I do take sort of a tough love approach to this and remind myself that I only have a limited amount of time. I honestly believe it's a very small percentage of my students who are going to cheat. So I have to determine how much of my time I want to spend trying to track those people down. And finally, in terms of academic misconduct, we might want to rethink, if we have a couple of high stakes activities in the course, that we might want to rethink that, because when students are under pressure and feel that their entire grade depends on one or two assessment activities, they may make decisions that they'll regret later. Finally, in terms of technical difficulties, think about how you're going to handle this in advance. If a student tries to submit a paper and runs into a technical problem, if a file gets corrupted, these are all decisions that, you know, are certainly up to you, but decide on them ahead of time so that when that happens, you're not scratching your head and trying to decide how to handle it. And finally, building in collaboration for your students is very, very important. It is more difficult. I will say that right up front. It's more difficult because of things like how do we assess each person's contributions and you know, how do we plan instructional activities and assessments that really do require true collaboration. But this is one of those skills that our students will need when they get out of school. And so anytime you can build in collaborative activities, I think it's a major plus.
Hey, Susan, so there's a bunch of questions that have come through. Before we move on, if you don't mind, I'll ask some of them. So the first one is from Paul. He just wants to comment. Sometimes students feel that they shouldn't bother unless it's absolutely required. Can you comment on that issue? And I think he's referring to the grading or doing an assignment.
Sure. You know, I have no problem requiring that my students participate in the activities that I think are most helpful. One of the ways we signal to our students that something is important is that we require it. If we think in our face-to-face classes that attendance is important, we require it. So I have no problem requiring activities that I think are going to be the most beneficial. What I have also done on occasion is say that, okay, then there are these required activities and then there are optional activities. You need to pick, of these 5, you need to pick 3. Because I think, you know, our students, they're busy. Yeah, they're going to do what is absolutely required, but honestly, I feel like by setting those requirements carefully, I'm signaling to my students that I think those things are important.
Okay, great. So another question from Jean. She likes to use clickers in embedded questions. In 75-minute classes, she has time to ask questions 2 times, one individual and then as a group. In my 50-minute class, I only have some time to get individual or team assessment. If the students understand that it is a low-stake quiz, to get attention or flush out misconceptions or improve attendance, but fail to prepare, how do you handle the low grades? Do you abandon the grading session? Do you abandon grading the session, and then attendance and preparation may suffer?
Wow, that's a
that is a tough window. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think the issue becomes, you know, when we have these low stakes activities, I think it's very important that the students see the relevance of those activities. When they are low stakes, for example, questions that are going on during a course, and students are responding with clickers or, you know, other forms of synchronous feedback, I think the questions, it needs to be very obvious to the students that these are relevant to what they're going to be doing. And for some students, it might even just be, you know what, this is going to help you do better on the test. That's going to resonate with them. We hope that it goes beyond that. But I think the real key to that is ensuring that the students understand whether this is, you know, that this is in fact relevant. Now, you know, that again in itself it can be a tough call, but I think that's really the key to getting students to recognize, yes, this is important. I do need to participate. This will help me. I think the other part of that is it's great to have students respond from a group, because then you get some sort of peer pressure or, you know, social pressure to not be the slacker in the group. And I hope that addressed at least part of that.
Yeah, so then just a couple follow-up from Paul. Is there a class size limit to the kinds of flexibility and structure? For example, once the class is bigger than X, then I have to look at the different assessment modes.
Well, I think that it certainly can be, especially if you have, for example, a writing intensive course. Once you have a large number of enrollments, it's going to be much more difficult for you to engage in assessments that require a lot of your time. This, however, is also the time that I would build in some of those peer assessment activities, having students, you know, help each other and provide feedback to one another on their papers, on you know, for example, the rough drafts. Students can be, you know, assessed based on the kind of feedback, the quality of the feedback that they gave to their peers. So I think that, yes, it does vary in terms of class size, but keeping in mind that, first of all, we don't always have to do everything ourselves in order to provide that feedback to students. And we can use groups, we can use, you know, for example, maybe 1 week this group is doing an activity and the rest of the students are not. So I think we need to think about how can we build in both peer activity and group work to help with those large enrollment courses.
Okay, I think we could probably move on at this point. There are a few more remaining questions, but perhaps we can ask them at the end of the session.
Great. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Tess Bader from CSU Global Campus to talk about feedback using waypoint outcomes.
Hey everybody, this is Tess Bader from CSU Global Campus, and I'm just going to jump right in. We have kind of a lot to cover on my slides and just a few minutes, so I'm just going to try to sort of skim over the top. And I'm not sure if any of you have had any experience using Waypoint, but one thing to note just very quickly is that Waypoint's our grading tool, and we use it on every assignment here at CSU Global. And we are in the process of adding integration with Turnitin plagiarism checker with this tool, so it automatically generates a plagiarism report on the instructor's grading screen. So it's really going to save us a lot of time, and our faculty are very excited about it. Okay, so the purpose of Waypoint is to provide instructors with interactive rubrics that really cut down time on grading, because you have preloaded comments in there. You can do custom comments. And the purpose of it is to evaluate writing assignments. It doesn't really work well with Excel or PowerPoint, but it's great for essay type assignments. And it's two-pronged. So what it does on the admin side is it pulls data, so we know where students are based on the learning outcomes that were set out for the courses that they're taking. And we also provide really great feedback to the student, while in turn cutting down the grading time for faculty. So we actually implemented this in January across all written assignments in all courses, and we really had rave reviews about this. Okay, so this is just a quick image of the Waypoint dashboard. So you'll see up there on the, let me find my little pointer here. Over here on the left side, you have a list of every course that you're teaching in Waypoint. And then you've got what I call avatars here in the middle. So you know that you have one student that needs graded. You have two that have been graded but not returned back to the student. And then you have one that has been returned. So once you choose that student that needs grading, you're taken into their paper. So what Waypoint does is it converts the student's paper into a PDF, and that allows for you to mark up within the Waypoint tool. So in this example, you can see the student submitted one paper. Here's the title of the paper. You can always view the original file that they submitted, which is usually a Word document. And then here you can see that we have selected some text, equal opportunity. So when you select that text, you get a pop-up of your comment library. And your comment library is preloaded. What we did was an institutional level comment library because we have very specific requirements in terms of APA formatting. So we wanted to be sure that all of our instructors were grading in those same terms. So we created a comment library that every instructor has access to. So in this example, you can see we have the writing assignment category, and then we have the APA subcategory, and then you have all these in-text citations here. So what happens is you'll choose one of these. Say they had an error in their title page, you'll choose title page, and it'll actually insert that comment onto their paper wherever you had highlighted the text on that paper. And so you'll see here is your list of comments. So you can see exactly what you're adding to the paper before you hit submit. And you can see equal opportunity was the section that we had highlighted, so it tells you we're going to attach these comments in yellow to this area of the paper that you highlighted. And then you can also just type in manually whatever comments you like here in this yellow area. So now you can see we've hit submit on our comments, so here they appear in line with that row of text within the student's paper. Okay, so that's the first part of Waypoint is the actual markup. And you can do it the other way. You can do the rubric first. But this is the second half, the rubric part. So what we did, it was a huge amount of work on the admin side, but the way our school is set up, we really like to standardize everything. So what we did was we built all the rubrics for each class, but this tool is really set up for individual instructors. And I believe Waypoint has a free license for individual instructors. So you might want to look into that if you're interested in using this for grading. And if you do use rubrics in your courses and if you write them yourself, this would be a really great tool for you to speed things up. So this is just a brief view of the rubric. So what you can see on the left is we have all of our rubric categories. So you can see the sales, budget, and that's cut off. Is the only one that we've chosen a performance level on so far. So you can see this little green trend bar here tells you where you rank the student in terms of performance level. So you can see they're right about in the middle on this one criteria, one rubric criteria. So you can also see here's the one we chose right here with the check mark on it. So you can read the text that will go back to the student. So this says most appropriate figures, yada yada. And then if you'd like to add to that, that's what the student's going to see. So if you want to add a personal touch to that, you also have this little student feedback box that you can type your own comments into. So what you would do is you would just choose for each of these 10 or so categories here, you would choose the appropriate performance level, and what it does is it automatically gives you a score. So once you get through those 10 or so categories, you'll have your grand total score out of whatever the points possible are. So now you can see this is the summary of this particular assignment score. So this student got a 213 out of 350. You do have the ability to fudge points if you like. Say they turned it in late, you can deduct a few points for that. If you don't really feel that the rubric quite fit with the way you had it set up, and you want to give them, a couple extra points to bump them up to an A, you can do that as well. So once you've finished marking up your paper, choosing your rubric, all you have to do is finalize the grade, and then you can move on to the next student. So really, it's a really quick process because it's all on one screen. You just finalize the grade, hit next, do your markup. Finalize the grade, hit next, do your markup. We also have the student roster view of Waypoint, so you can go in at a glance and see who submitted a paper for a particular assignment, when they submitted it, and then you can also see if it's been graded or returned, or if they've never submitted anything. So this is actually one of my favorite views of Waypoint because it does give you the summary up at the top, but then you can go down student by student, and if they say, hey, I submitted something, you can go in here really quickly and verify whether that's true or not without going through your grade book in your Blackboard Grade Center. Okay, so that's all for Waypoint, and then I do have just a very few, like 3 or 4 slides on our self-assessment tools, because obviously Waypoint would be a written assignment that you're getting feedback from your instructor like a week later. So the self-assessment tools are really important because you do get immediate feedback, and we have 2 different types that allow you to see sort of where you're standing in the class. And we based this on the part of the rubric that calls for self-assessment to be constructive and meaningful, full feedback. So all of our self-assessments, let me get to my next slide and I'll show you the first one, do contain that feedback, and they are completely self-directed. They're actually open for the entire course. We have 8-week courses. So you can do these master exercises at any time. We don't have due dates for them. So students can always go back and take the Module 1 master exercise, even if we're already in Module 5 or 6. So the master exercises are probably our most important type of self-assessment. They're actually quizzes, and they're usually worth 10 to 20 points. And we have 1 for each module. And these we allow students to take as many times as they like, and what we do is we keep the highest score that they achieve on these quizzes. So these are only in our undergraduate coursework, and like I mentioned before, they can work through these at their own pace. They can always go back, they can work ahead, and it really helps them to determine their level of knowledge and really see if they need to reach out for extra help or try to find some additional resources. So I've got a screenshot of our master exercises. You can see here, most of them are just multiple choice questions. We try to avoid fill in the blank just because that's a grading hazard when it comes to giving them the immediate feedback. If they make a spelling error or an extra space, sometimes it'll mark them wrong. So we really try to avoid the fill in the blank and just stick to multiple choice, true or false, and matching questions. So each of these questions contains feedback line by line. So if they choose an incorrect answer, they'll be told it's incorrect, and they'll be given a hint that helps direct them to the correct answer. And if they choose the correct answer, then they'll be giving a congratulatory message and a little bit of like one step further in that information to help really solidify the concept in their minds. Okay, so our second type of self-assessment is our Check Your Understanding exercises. And these are sort of the non-graded counterpart to mastery exercises. These are woven through our module content. Wherever the instructional designers felt it was appropriate, they'll put some type of activity. Most of these are short 5-question quizzes that address just the last 1 or 2 pages of what you just read. Some of them get a little bit more creative and are matching exercises. I believe we have some crossword puzzle type activities in here as well. And these really they're ungraded, so obviously student participation may be a little lacking in these and we don't track it. But we really want to treat these almost as flashcard activities that students can always go back to and make sure that, okay, I've read 1 page, I'm going to test myself on this 1 page before I move on. So here's an example of one of our standard Check Your Understandings. This one's just a multiple choice quiz. And you can see this one contains feedback as well. So it tells them what the correct answer is and why. They can always take these as many times as they like. They can shuffle the questions. They can skip questions. And really, that's pretty much the end of our 4-slide self-assessment section. So what we're going to do is move on, and I'll just briefly introduce Dr. Tori Bond, who's going to talk to us about
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being able to follow both of you ladies, because as I'm listening to your presentation, I see so many of the concepts and ideas that you talked about in the images that I'm going to be sharing with them. So it's really going to round us off as we conclude our presentation today. I'm Tori Bond. I'm instructional designer for the Online and Professional Studies program at Cal Baptist. And my primary responsibility is to work with faculty and help them create engaging online courses that are interactive, so that we're not just, read, and take a test. So I'm going to focus on the assessment design portion of the ECP rubric and talk to you about the conceptual framework that undergirds our assessment plan for Social 213 and for the most part all of our online classes at CBU Online. So the multiple measures conceptual framework undergirds the assessment plan, and as you see on the pictures here, it illustrates on the cover and in the cartoon on the right, using several different types of assessments increases the validity of what you're measuring, and it enhances the validity of decisions made based on the assessments. So while there are many different types of assessments, and none of them are inherently better than another, the Sociology 213 plan was built on direct, authentic, embedded, and integrated assessments. Direct assessments are those that I personally evaluate versus relying on assessment data evaluated by peers in the course, fieldwork supervisors if I have them go out and do some activities, or based on student reflection. So I actually evaluate them. Using the Blackboard testing feature, students get immediate feedback, but I am able to look at the basic item analysis information for all the students to determine what misconceptions still remain from a lesson, and I can target my weekly update comments accordingly. So on the image here, you're looking at the arrow pointing to a Chapter 1 quiz using the Blackboard testing feature. In the upper, not upper, but to the right of that image is a Animoto video from a student who was doing this video on a nonprofit organization that she had chosen to do her service learning project about. And Animoto is a web tool that turns images and text into music videos. So in this case, the young lady chose to do her service learning project on the Salvation Army because her father was taken in by them prior to his adoption with a family. So these are just a couple of tools I've used for direct assessment. Embedded assessments are those used to check for understandings, as both Tess and Susan have mentioned prior in their presentations. We check for understanding during the course of the lesson. In this case, students had to read about several theorists and theories, and they were asked to use data from a celebrity blog of their choice to analyze the topic from 3 different theoretical perspectives. So this, again, is an example of an embedded assessment that came after they had some instructional, sort of like a mini lecture and VoiceThread. They'd read some, the chapter related to theories and theorists, and then this was time for them to go out, collect some data from a celebrity blog, and analyze it from 3 different perspectives. Authentic assessment is particularly highlighted in the ECP rubric, and the ECP rubric for assessment design encourages authentic assessments. So this, in order to achieve in the exemplary category, you want to foster higher order thinking and assessments that take place within authentic environments. In this case, students completed 4 volunteer hours at a nonprofit service organization of their choice, and during those 4 hours, they practiced the skills learned throughout the course, such as analyzing organizational culture, group dynamics, etc. So the directions for the assessment were built using Blackboard's interactive wiki tool, and individual students created 1 wiki page for the different aspects of the project. Lastly, the same project is also used as an integrated assessment. And integrated assessments measure multiple objectives at once. In this case, many of the learning objectives could be assessed through this one service learning project. So as you can see, the assessment design is varied so that their attainment of learning outcomes is measured through multiple choice quizzes, data analysis assignments, and the culminating service learning project. And that's all I have for you in terms of integrating, in terms of assessment design and how it relates to the ECP rubric. So I will turn it back to Sharon so that she can facilitate our Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori and Tess and Susan. So there were a couple questions that have been asked in the chat window that we didn't get to yet. And if you have questions, please continue to enter them in the chat window. So this question is for Tess from Liz. 2 questions. Can Waypoint be used offline, and can it be used on iPad and readers?
Waypoint does not allow use offline at this time. You do have to have access to the internet because it's a web-based tool, and it is compatible on iPads. That's actually a new development, and I don't know if any of our faculty are using it at this point, but that came about probably 2 or 3 months ago. They made it available on iPads.
Okay, thanks for that. And then there was a question earlier for you, Tess, as well, from Dan. Does so much standardization step on the toes of academic freedom and pedagogical creativity? And I think he was referring to when you're going through your different parts of the presentation.
Yes, I'm told that we're run like a for-profit university. Because we're 100% online and our faculty are all adjunct, they're all spread out all over the nation and actually the world. So really what they do is act as facilitators, and all courses are created in-house. So we have a large group of content experts and instructional designers, and they use a template to build all of our courses. So we know exactly what is being put out there for our students, and we base this all on Quality Matters rubrics. And yes, it really does limit the creativity for our instructors, but it offers us on the admin side a lot more control, and it gives the students a lot of consistency because we do focus on adult learners that have families and full-time jobs. It makes the learning experience a lot easier for them because they know the structure of our courses and they know exactly what to expect.
So there's been many questions about Waypoint and how it integrates with Blackboard, and I believe that Waypoint is a third-party building block that can be integrated that your system administrator has to turn on the building block. I would need to find out the cost. Judith has asked the cost of the building block, and I don't know the answer offhand. I would have to look that up. And then Paul has a question for you, Tess, about how many people are teaching the courses using Waypoint.
Currently, we have, I believe, just under 300 faculty with us, and so that would account for every course across the university uses Waypoint. So at any given time, because we have overlapping terms, we have about 300 faculty teaching at any given time.
And this question, any of the three of you could answer it. What are the pros and cons of creating your own assessments? Can anyone address that?
This is Susan. I guess I'll jump in on that. And I guess the question is whether the person means each instructor creating their own. Sharon, do you know if that's what that means?
So it came to me privately from Jetmir. What are the pros and cons of creating your own assessments? Jetmir, if you could post that question into the chat.
I think that, if we're just talking about each instructor creating assessments for a course, I think certainly the advantage is that, as has been sort of going by in the chat, does standardization of courses reduce the amount of creativity that an instructor can demonstrate? And I don't know, I'll have to go watch the PBS documentary that Jim has suggested in the chat area, but I think that we definitely need to standardize content probably, and certainly outcomes, in order to have institutional consistency and accountability. But how one gets there certainly can vary. The kinds of activities that the instructors and the students would engage in, which would include certainly the assessments. I think there's still plenty of room for creativity there. Now, whether your institution supports that certainly may vary, and I know that institutions that are solely online as proprietary entities and who hire almost all just adjuncts very often lock things down incredibly and do not allow a high degree of creativity, and that does concern me. So I think the advantage with creating your own assessments as an instructor is that it does enable you to demonstrate that creativity and take advantage of some of that academic freedom and certainly just that initiative that I think we're all really interested in demonstrating. This is Susan again, and I just wanted to mention, I just saw a comment go by about different kinds of assessments targeting student styles of learning. I just want to address that real quickly. I think as course developers and instructors, we have a responsibility to stretch our students' learning styles. There's some interesting evidence coming out now that in fact learning styles are as much habit and familiarity as any sort of cognitive strengths and weaknesses, different from talents necessarily, but learning styles can be learned. And I think it's imperative that we stretch our students' learning styles by providing a wide variety of activities, including a variety of assessments, so that our students in fact don't always fall back on what's tried and true and most familiar. And I'll turn it back to Sharon.
So I don't see any direct questions in the chat window, so if you do have any additional questions, continue to post them in there and we will address them. Or if you did post one earlier in the session and we might have missed it because the chat goes by so quickly, please feel free to re-enter it at this point as well. So Wendy asks, we would appreciate the citations for this comment about the new studies that learning styles are learned. Please have them put into our BB class.
Yes, this is Susan. I can provide some of those citations. I'll be happy to put those into the course site. And I just see one here that Dan Willingham. Dan has a wonderful website. He also has a book, I believe, called Why Don't Students Like School? That's more aimed at K-12, but has some very interesting information based on cognitive processing research. So I'll look up some citations and be happy to provide those.
So a question just came in from Lily. I'm curious how to motivate unmotivated students to complete required ungraded assignments.
This is Susan. I certainly didn't mean to say that if students don't complete ungraded assignments, nothing happens. I think certainly a final grade needs to reflect that not all the requirements were completed in the course. For some students, the main motivation for them will be a grade. And while we might find that very frustrating and it sounds really cynical, in many cases that's what we're going to find. And so not everything needs to have a grade in the sense of you got 7 points for this, or this is going to contribute to your final point total or whatever. It is required, and you can have a set number of, these are the things that are required for the course, so that it's credit, not credit. You either did it or you did not do it, and the final grade would reflect that not all of the requirements for the course were met. For those students who are motivated by grades, that probably is going to be your best bet.
And then I think her follow-up, is that done through participation marks?
It can be done through participation. It can also be done in the grade book of having just, the sort of check mark, completed, not completed.
Okay, and then, this can be for all three of you. Paul asks, can you talk about the kind of tools that are included in Blackboard that would take advantage of these various assessment strategies?
I'm sorry, was that one aimed at me?
I think any one of you actually could address that, but Susan, if you want to take a stab.
I'm sorry, I was actually responding to someone on the chat when you read the question.
No worries at all. Can you talk about the kind of tools that are included in Blackboard that would take advantage of these various assessment strategies?
Oh, honestly, I like to use the wiki tool. I think it's a wonderful tool for collaborative work, and certainly as an assessment tool can be extremely useful. I think that discussions can be an excellent assessment tool. I like to see using a variety of tools, but having students post, for example, if they do an assignment or a paper, that the students post their work for others to see. I'd like to think that my students do their best work for me, but I hear over and over again from people that when they require their students to post their work for their peers to see, the quality goes up. So I think there are a variety of tools we can use, and the real key is figuring out what is it you want students to do to show you that they've mastered this or that they're making progress. And I would say, think pretty creatively about ways to use the blog, or ways to use a wiki or a journal, or using real-time sort of, like video conferencing tools as well, because I think, if we want our students to engage in conversation with one another in that sort of dynamic, real-time environment, that can be an assessment kind of activity because it provides feedback. It allows them to engage with the course content, and it reinforces what's important. So I think really thinking creatively about using a lot of the tools in Blackboard for those sorts of ongoing assessments can be very helpful.
So I don't see any other questions coming in. So again, if you want to actually pull out a question about how you'd love to hear how grades are attached to these kind of assessments, but I think Deb actually answered it. You can, attach rubrics now through Blackboard itself. So before we wrap up today, do Tess or Tori, we've been doing this at the end of each session so far. Just want to touch on their experience of submitting their course into the Exemplary course program, and what your experience was of winning the award this year.
Well, thank you for asking, Sharon. I had a wonderful time preparing for the ECP course. One, I was really looking forward to getting the course out there so I could get some feedback from my peers, just new ideas and a different way of approaching some of the tasks that I was looking at. And I also enjoyed working with a team here at CBU as we were volunteering as reviewers to look at other folks' courses. And we got great ideas just looking at them, and we've also used it as an opportunity to contact those individuals, ask how they did things, and just kind of build some rapport and collegiality, across meeting different people. So I really enjoyed that. Before I actually submitted a course, I served as a reviewer, and that was the most enlightening thing I had ever done, because I was just getting started in instructional design and getting started working with faculty. And after that, that's when I thought being a reviewer would be a great professional development activity. So that's how our staff, our faculty participated last year as a team, and we looked at several courses, both together and in small groups. And it was a very positive, great professional development activity, and I would highly encourage that for other universities to use it as an opportunity for faculty development.
Great, thank you so much, Tori. Tess, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, the whole Exemplary course process was really overwhelming. Our president actually was the one that decided we should nominate a course. And so I was charged with preparing the application and choosing which course. And, we have roughly 200 courses right now, so just picking which course was really overwhelming. And then getting the application submitted on time, because it's quite a big application. So if any of you are thinking about it, just bear in mind it's a lot of work, but it's totally worth it. So I submitted the application, and it was like we found out we got approved, and everything after that was a real whirlwind, because it was like we had to immediately submit a video tour of the course, and then immediately we had to submit a PowerPoint because I was asked to present at Blackboard World for that, which was great. It was a free trip to Blackboard World, which I'd been to before, and that right there is just an excellent experience. If nobody's gone to Blackboard World before, you should just go. It's awesome networking. It's totally over the top. It's, you're working, but it really feels like a vacation. So I recommend that anybody go, and if you can do it by way of an Exemplary Course Award, then, you'll get to go for free. So.
All right, thank you so much to all of you, Tess and Tori and Susan. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience with everyone today and helping to answer some of the questions that have come through. So please don't forget about the tweet chat tomorrow. We've also, next week is going to be our last live session, and we'll be covering the last section of the rubric on learner support. So again, really appreciate everybody's time, and thank you so much. And we will speak again next week.